How do we know that a person is guilty? At first glance, the answer might seem quite simple: evidence in the testimonies of witnesses who saw the murder. But what if those are misleading? If sentencing a person to death is based on misleading and false evidence, how can a fair verdict be reached? There is a cult film that places exactly these questions at its center. The case itself is not particularly complicated. At the heart of the matter, there is a murder. An 18-year-old boy who grew up in a slum is alleged to have stabbed his father, and to decide whether he is guilty, a jury of 12 people is assembled. The jurors will move to a room, deliberate, and ultimately reach a single verdict through a vote. The critical point here is this: unanimity is required for the verdict to be valid. In other words, all 12 jurors must agree on a single decision. If the boy is found guilty, he will be placed in the electric chair and executed. 12 people with completely different life backgrounds and characters will argue in the same room and arrive at a single verdict. Seems simple enough, doesn't it?
All those voting not guilty? One. Right.
In the first vote, only Juror 8 votes not guilty. Before focusing on Juror 8, let's look at those who voted guilty.
Now, all those voting guilty, please raise your hands.
Let's pause here. 6 jurors raised their hands without any hesitation, but then look at the other members. Jurors 2, 5, 6, 9, and 11 first glance around the room, then raise their hands hesitantly. This is a textbook example of conformity. Rather than examining the evidence and reaching a decision based on their own judgment, these individuals act in line with the majority of the group. Furthermore, when these jurors are asked why they voted guilty, they are unable to provide a satisfying explanation.
I just think he's guilty. I thought it was obvious from the word go.
In such a situation, a suspicion arises. If the vote had been taken in secret, perhaps one or more of them would have voted differently. Now, let's set these hesitant jurors aside and focus on those who raised their hands without any hesitation. When asked why they voted guilty, the strongest argument they offer for that decision is the testimonies of the eyewitnesses. There are 2 critical witnesses in the case who claim to have seen the murder. The first is an elderly man who lives on the bottom floor of the apartment building where the murder took place. In his testimony, he states the following: just before the murder, he heard the boy shout, "I'm going to kill you," at his father, got out of bed and reached the door in 15 seconds, and at that moment saw the boy running down the stairs. The second witness is a woman who lives in the building directly across from the apartment where the murder occurred. Between these 2 buildings runs a commuter rail line. In her testimony, she says that she was woken up by a scream while in bed, and as she moved toward the window to understand what was happening, she noticed a commuter train passing by, and that as the train rushed past, she caught a brief glimpse through the windows of the cars of the moment the boy attacked his father with a knife in the apartment across the street. As the film progresses, we see that both of these testimonies contain certain logical flaws, or more precisely, doubts. And the person who tries to surface these doubts and push the other jurors to think in that direction turns out to be Juror 8. So what makes Juror 8 so different? Or let's ask the question in reverse. What is present in the other 11 jurors that is absent in Juror 8? Of all these things, the most important is prejudice. If a person holds a prejudice that the boy is guilty and the evidence in hand appears to support that conclusion, questioning the accuracy and consistency of that evidence holds little appeal, because questioning it could seriously damage their prejudice, and they may perceive that as a personal defeat. For such a person, abandoning a prejudice built from past experience can feel like an insult to their own intelligence and judgment. We can see this profile in 2 significant characters in the story, Juror 3 and Juror 10. Let's start with Juror 3. This juror maintains an absolute conviction that the boy is guilty right up until the end of the story. When we look closely at his character, we can see that he harbors a deep anger toward young people, but the source of that anger has nothing to do with the boy in the case. It comes from a far more personal place, from a fight with his own son years ago.
When he was 16, we had a fight. Hit me in the jaw. He's a big kid. Haven't seen him for 2 years.
The two came to blows, and his son has not called his father since that day. We can infer that Juror 3, due to this unfortunate experience from his past, has developed a negative view of the youth of the era. What he says about the younger generation's disrespect, disobedience, and tendency to raise their hand against their fathers is largely a grievance about his own son. While believing that the young defendant is guilty, he is unknowingly voicing his complaints about his own son. In Juror 10, there's a different kind of prejudice, a class-based contempt. In his view, it is hardly surprising for someone from the slums to commit a crime. For a young man from that kind of background, killing his own father is an entirely plausible outcome.
You're not going to tell me that we're supposed to believe this kid, knowing what he is? Listen, I've lived among them all my life. You can't believe a word they say. You know that.
Alongside his prejudice, the eyewitness testimonies also happen to support Juror 10's bias, which reinforces his firm belief that the boy is guilty. When we look at Juror 7, we see something else entirely: indifference. There is only one thing on his mind: the baseball game he planned to attend that evening.
Yeah, we can all get out of here pretty quick, huh? I don't know about the rest of you, but I happen to have tickets to that ball game tonight.
Whether the boy is guilty or not barely occupies his thoughts. Yet at the same time, he casually brings up the defendant's troubled past as a justification.
This kid is 5 for 0. Well, look at his record. When he was 10, he was in children's court. He threw a rock at a teacher. When he was 15, he was at reform school. He stole a car. He's been arrested for mugging. He's picked up twice for knife fighting.
Yet the boy's past is not evidence that proves he committed the crime. This indifference is not limited to Juror 7 alone. Juror 12 is scribbling on paper or playing small games with the person next to him while the discussions go on. Juror 1, meanwhile, is occupied with his duties as foreman, managing the deliberation, taking on responsibilities like determining speaking order and keeping the discussion organized. He appears unable to focus adequately on whether the boy is truly guilty. Moreover, we see Juror 3, who we mentioned earlier as being firmly convinced of the boy's guilt, displaying an indifferent attitude toward the case in certain scenes as well.
How'd you like it?
Oh, I don't know. It was pretty interesting.
I almost fell asleep.
Because these jurors want to deliver their verdict as quickly as possible and return to their daily lives, they see voting the defendant guilty outright as the easier and more effortless path, rather than thinking carefully and placing their doubts on a logical foundation. Now let's take a closer look at the jurors who at the start of the video voted hesitantly for the boy's guilt. Since these jurors are neither prejudiced nor indifferent, we can call them the hesitant. Take Juror 2 as an example. Juror 2 is quiet and introverted. In the first vote, we see him look around before raising his hand. He lacks the confidence to produce a strong argument on his own, and when he does speak, he gets cut off. Juror 5 is someone who, like the accused boy, grew up in the slums. Because of this, as the discussions progress, he begins to empathize with the young boy.
Brother, you can say that again. The kids who crawl out of these places are real trash. I don't want any part of them, I'm telling you.
Listen, I've lived in a slum all my life.
Juror 6 is a simple man who makes his living through manual labor, honest and good-hearted. But since he has few opinions of his own in the early stages of the debate, he doesn't take the floor. Juror 9 is the oldest among the jurors and one of the most important characters in the story. He raises his hand hesitantly at the start of the vote, yet he is the only person who supports Juror 8's doubts from the very beginning. He is quiet throughout the meeting, but as the film progresses, we come to understand that this silence stems from the fact that he is carefully observing the jurors and the discussion. Juror 11, as his accent reveals, is a watchmaker who immigrated to America. Out of deep respect for democracy and the justice system, he occasionally pushes back against the other jurors' attempts to rush to a close. Because of this, as the discussions proceed, he becomes one of the jurors who argues that the evidence must be carefully weighed for the verdict to truly be fair. So there it is, the prejudiced, the indifferent, and the hesitant. In such an environment, reaching the truth through logical reasoning seems unlikely. That is why, in order to uncover what the truth actually is, someone extraordinary is needed, and Juror 8 enters at exactly this point. What makes Juror 8 so significant? Yes, he possesses a sharp enough mind to detect the logical contradictions in the evidence. He is also a strong communicator. But there's one quality that makes this character truly special: a sense of responsibility. At this table, a human life is being deliberated, and a matter carrying this much importance is far too critical for prejudice, indifference, or hesitation to have any place. In Juror 8's view, this case deserves to be genuinely thought over for hours. At the very least, it deserves an honest discussion.
So how come you vote not guilty?
Well, there were 11 votes for guilty. It's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
As Juror 8 puts forward this perspective, we witness the other jurors in the room slowly beginning to change their minds. The other jurors gradually shed their initial indifferent or hesitant roles and start to understand the true weight of the responsibility they carry. Some of them begin to approach the case with doubt, and alongside Juror 8, attempt to re-examine the evidence in hand to find the logical flaws. The most concrete manifestation of this transformation is the eyewitness testimonies being brought back to the table. When these testimonies are examined individually, we find ourselves convinced that the boy is guilty. But when we consider both testimonies together, contradictions emerge, both within each testimony and between the two. For example, the elderly man says that when he heard a shout from the apartment on the floor above where the murder occurred, he got out of bed and reached the door in 15 seconds. But it is theoretically impossible for an elderly man with difficulty walking to cover that distance in 15 seconds. As for the female witness's testimony, we mentioned that the murder took place while a commuter train was passing. Given the noise that train would have been making, the idea that the elderly man could have heard the boy shout, "I'm going to kill you," and recognize the voice as the boy's, at that very moment raises serious doubts. But the true turning point is something Juror 9 notices about the female eyewitness. While speaking with Juror 4, Juror 9 notices marks on either side of his nose from wearing glasses.
She had those same marks. She kept rubbing them in court.
He's right. She did do that a lot.
When we learn that the woman also wears glasses, a question lodges in our minds. Was the woman wearing her glasses when she witnessed the moment of the murder?
Do you wear glasses when you go to bed?
No, I don't. No one wears eyeglasses to bed.
So how clearly could someone without their glasses, freshly woken from sleep in the middle of the night, see through the windows of a rapidly passing train, especially when we consider that the distance to the scene of the murder was 20 meters? When we bring together these two suspicious testimonies, they lead us to the following question. Why would an eyewitness give a false or incomplete testimony, especially someone with no personal grievance against the defendant? Why would they need to lie or give an inaccurate account? For instance, why doesn't the woman say that she wasn't wearing her glasses when she looked at the scene of the murder and that she couldn't see clearly? As for the elderly man, why does he claim to have covered a distance in a time that is impossible for him to cover? Or why does he make no mention in his testimony of the noise the commuter train was making at the moment of the murder? Moreover, the self-assured manner in which these individuals deliver their testimonies is itself a subject worth examining. In such a situation, we are faced with the following question. Is an eyewitness testimony as reliable as we think? The Innocence Project, a legal organization dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals, used DNA evidence to reveal that eyewitness testimonies contain far more margin of error than commonly assumed. One of the organization's findings is this. In certain cases re-examined with DNA evidence, individuals who were actually innocent turned out to have been wrongfully convicted. In approximately 70% of these cases, the most important basis for the court's conviction was eyewitness testimony. In other words, many people had been found guilty based on false testimonies given by eyewitnesses. But why? Thinking about the scenario in the film, it is known that a murder takes place in a very short span of time and that the perpetrator flees the scene quickly. In such a situation, the claim that a witness could accurately identify the killer's face during that brief moment is itself an assertion that deserves to be questioned. Another important finding from the Innocence Project is this. In a murder involving a weapon or sharp object, the witness's attention tends to be drawn not to the perpetrator's face, but to that object. When we bring these arguments together, the elderly man's ability to identify the defendant's face as he hurried down the stairs, or the female witness's ability to see the defendant's face clearly through the passing train without fixating on the knife, become suspect claims. But perhaps the most striking finding concerns stress. Because an eyewitness is not someone who regularly witnesses murder, and the murder they likely just witnessed is almost certainly their first such experience, they undergo intense stress. And under this intense stress, not only the senses, but memory as well begins to function imperfectly. Human memory does not work like a recording device. It works more like assembling scattered puzzle pieces. The more intense the stress experienced at the moment of the murder, the lower the likelihood of being able to correctly assemble the pieces held in memory. In the 1950s United States, where the film takes place, technologies such as DNA analysis or security cameras do not yet exist. For this reason, eyewitness testimony carries enormous weight in court. In some cases, it may even be the only tangible piece of evidence available. But a source containing this much margin of error can affect a person's fate even when that person is innocent. And it is precisely at this point that the jury's role comes to the fore. A jury has both the right and the obligation to question not only the event itself, but also the witness to that event. Looking at the historical record, given that so many people have unjustly spent years in prison due to faulty or incomplete witness testimonies, it is quite clear just what an important responsibility it is to serve as a juror in a court of law. Juror 8 has understood this responsibility from the very beginning of the case, and as a result of all of Juror 8's efforts, the other jurors come to realize how immense the responsibility they carry truly is. The great majority of the jurors begin to see how questionable the eyewitness testimonies and the other evidence are, and start changing their votes. By the time of the final vote, 3 people remain who say guilty: Juror 3, Juror 4, and Juror 10. But before moving on to these 3 important jurors, and the film's pivotal final section, we must ask the question that has been lingering in our minds since the very beginning of the video. What if the boy really did stab his father? What if both witnesses' testimonies are true, despite all the doubts? And what if Juror 8 has been going to all this trouble for the sake of someone who is actually a killer? In that case, wouldn't the role of this character who represents justice in the film be completely inverted?
You really think he's innocent? I don't know.
There's a concept that comes up again and again throughout the film: reasonable doubt. If a juror has even a single reasonable doubt about the events or about what the witnesses have said, they are required to vote not guilty. So why is the concept of reasonable doubt so important? In other words, why does a juror having or not having a reasonable doubt play such a critical role? Because at its core, the case presents a two-sided moral dilemma. What if the boy is truly innocent and is about to be executed unjustly? Or what if he truly is the killer and the system is setting him free? What we are actually asking is this: is it worse for an innocent person to be punished wrongfully, or for a guilty person to go free? It is Juror 6, one of the least vocal throughout the deliberation, who gives voice to this dilemma.
Supposing you talk us all out of this and, kid really did knife his father, huh?
To think through this dilemma, we need to take a brief detour into criminal law. There is a principle in criminal law named after the English jurist William Blackstone, known as the Blackstone ratio. It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than that 1 innocent suffer. This understanding, which forms the foundation of many of today's legal systems, argues that the court's priority is not to punish the guilty, but to protect the innocent. A concept known as the presumption of innocence comes into play at exactly this point. A person is innocent until proven guilty. That is to say, if the court is not entirely certain, the defendant should not be punished. So how sound is the Blackstone ratio? Let us consider a guilty person going free. Since the system has not punished them, their motivation to commit crimes may increase, and the crimes they commit could reach serious proportions. Worse still, this person could increase the evil in society and take the lives of many innocent people. But the injustice created by punishing an innocent person gives rise to an entirely different set of problems. When an innocent person is sent to prison, they may begin to think that doing what is right, abiding by human values and legal rules, offers no guarantee whatsoever. And in such a situation, the damage done to that person's belief in virtue, goodness, and the meaning of order could turn them into a bad person. Now let us reverse the Blackstone ratio and frame the sentence as follows. It is better for 10 innocents to suffer than for 1 guilty person to go free. Finding this logic within today's legal systems is nearly impossible, but certain decisions made by states against their enemies in wartime, particularly when major historical wars are concerned, align precisely with this understanding. I want to give an example from a war not too distant from our own times. In the final stage of World War II, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, one of Japan's most important cities, in order to force Japan to surrender. Living in that city were both Japanese soldiers and civilian residents who had nothing whatsoever to do with the war. Operating under the philosophy of, we do not care if innocent people die, as long as we can be sure our enemies are dead, the government caused tens of thousands of innocent people to lose their lives in agony alongside the soldiers in Japan. 12 angry men. The Blackstone ratio and the Hiroshima event belong to different contexts, but in all three the same question is asked. What is the cost of sacrificing the innocent? Now let's return to the film and to Juror 8's method. His approach of treating the evidence with skepticism and his method of getting the other jurors to think about that skepticism are remarkably powerful.
This boy's been hit so many times in his life that violence is practically it's a normal state of affairs with him. I can't see 2 slaps in the face provoking him into committing murder.
It may have been too many. Everyone has a breaking point.
When we focus closely on Juror 8, we notice this. He questions even his own arguments because he is certain of nothing. In fact, even though he is the only one who voted not guilty in the first round, he says that if he finds himself alone again in the second round, he will change his vote to guilty.
There are 11 votes for guilty. I won't stand alone. We'll take in a guilty verdict to the judge right now.
He does not try to impose his own thinking on anyone. There are even scenes where he cannot fully refute the arguments made against him.
You mean you're asking us to believe that somebody else did the stabbing with exactly the same kind of knife?
The odds are 1,000,000 to 1.
It's possible.
But not very probable.
Juror 8 is not trying to prove that the boy is innocent. Had he approached the matter that way, he would most likely have failed, because the other jurors are already stacking argument upon argument in favor of guilt, and in that situation, if Juror 8 had tried to impose a definitive counterposition the way they did, he would have been no different from the jurors who were already certain. He might not even have been taken seriously. When we look at Juror 3 and Juror 10, who project absolute certainty that the boy is guilty, we see that in a discussion centered on doubt, they sometimes betray their own prejudices, and sometimes speak with such absolute certainty that they end up looking ridiculous.
It's not possible? No, it's not possible.
Whenever Juror 3 and Juror 10 lose an argument, they take it as a personal defeat. They want to pull others to their point of view, they appear completely sure of themselves, and they turn every argument into something personal. So how do these two jurors change their votes? Because Juror 3 and Juror 10's arguments are grounded in personal reasons, the way they change their votes is also quite personal. The other jurors at the table change their votes calmly because they have begun to doubt their own positions. But Juror 3 and Juror 10 change their votes not merely because their arguments have come into doubt, but at the moment they begin to doubt themselves. For them, changing their vote is not just a change of opinion, it is also their own egos accepting defeat. But throughout all of this, there is one juror who stands in a truly distinct place, Juror 4. If you recall, in the first vote section, we did not place Juror 4 in the prejudiced, the indifferent, or the hesitant category, because this person alongside Juror 8 is one of the most important characters in the story. Right up until the film's final scene, this person believes the defendant is guilty, yet unlike Juror 3 and Juror 10, he is the only guilty voter who grounds his arguments in logical reasoning rather than personal bias. Juror 4, who remains calm throughout the meeting and never once raises his voice, maintains a consistent position from start to finish.
No point in getting nasty. Keep trying to turn this into a contest.
He does not react emotionally, he holds no personal anger. Moreover, he is someone who does not hesitate to change his opinion when he encounters a reasonable doubt. In this respect, Juror 4, together with Juror 8, is responsible for the sharpest and most honest exchanges in the film. It is for exactly this reason that Juror 4's change of vote at the end of the film comes not from prejudice, not from external pressure, but from the fact that he has developed a reasonable doubt about the defendant's guilt.
No. I'm convinced. Not guilty.
So, what is the central question of this story? Is this boy actually a killer or not? The film does not answer that question, but the question it truly wants to ask us is not that one. The real question is this: how should one conduct oneself when deliberating over a person's fate? And the answer to that question emerges in the final vote. The minds that in the first vote said guilty with prejudice, anger, and indifference, by the final vote have begun to rely on doubt and reason.